Our next speaker, our final featured speaker, John Foster. Education, briefly I'll mention here, 4 years higher education, no degree, undeclared pre-engineering, geology, architecture, etc. Vocations, jack of all trades in engineering, engineering most of his life in the nuclear, aerospace, fluidic, commercial, and civil fields. Not a so-called nuclear or aerospace engineer. Home builder and general contractor for about 10 years, and various other endeavors, as most of us could say, I guess. UFO experience, one sighting in 1981, a few mysterious events throughout his life that he couldn't explain. 1986, 1987, he recalled an enormous number of UFO experiences that had occurred since he was a toddler around 1940. You've seen the artwork outside. You can tell from that John has had a lot of experiences. So I've been wanting to have him for several years, ever since I found out about the basic outlines of his story. Please welcome from Lincoln, Nebraska, John Foster.
Well, I can't see anybody out there. I hope there's somebody there. Thank you, Lou, for the kind introduction. It's a pleasure being here and seeing you all today. Can everyone hear me okay? Even in the back, can you hear me? Okay. Well, we have heard all of the excellent speakers of the last couple of days. Some have touched areas of UFO reality that was not accepted in mainstream research a decade ago. This is a great relief to me as a contactee. I can't tell you how much I appreciate the acceptance and openness of the conference. And I need to tell you that my heart goes out to Melanie Young and Dr. Robert Finnick. Melanie has a lot of courage. And if you can't tell, I'm a little nervous here also. You all look like a great crowd. I've seen you before, but I can't see you now. I assume you wouldn't be here if you didn't suspect that UFOs might be real. I know they're real, but I sometimes wonder if I'm really real. Real is a funny word. For us Northerners, it's kind of like funny like you all. That is, when you first hear it, you're not quite sure you know what it means. Speaking of real, I realize that many of you might not understand the stark reality of very close UFO encounters, whatever reality is. If some of you believe you might have had a UFO experience, but you're not quite sure, maybe what I have to say today will help you decide one way or the other. Who are you really? Do you suppose, no matter who you think you are, that you might be important? Could you have a role in some mysterious, immense plan that affects all of humankind? That is, a plan that affects all humans who are now living, who have ever lived, and who will live in the infinite, eternal universe. To further this idea along, I'd like you to ask yourselves, why are you here? What are some of your feelings and thoughts today, especially those feelings and thoughts connected to your innermost urgings? The big question is, could your urgings or unusual feelings be connected to UFO experiences you don't remember? I can imagine they just might be. You know, I'd really like to come out there, sit down, and just have a casual conversation about the amazing things that have happened to me. But I want to show you a lot of slides, and I want to tell you as much of my story as possible. This takes a prepared talk. Therefore, I apologize now for being so formal, and I will be a little mechanic as we go through this because I want to sync the slides with the information. If I didn't do this, I don't believe you would understand. I sincerely appreciate you being here, and I applaud you for being here because it takes a lot of courage, at least for many of us, to simply face the reality of close UFO encounters. There's that word again, reality. Conferences like the Ozark Conference are among the few places we can all get together and face the enigma more directly. And I hear the Ozark Conference is one of the few conferences in the U.S., at least, that emphasizes the abduction encounter. We abductees and contactees owe Lou Farish a great deal, and his crew for putting the conference together, and also Lou for, I don't know where he is, I can't see him, but for putting out the UFO news clipping service. I think they deserve a big hand, and would you join me in showing our appreciation? This is a good place to pull the phenomena out of the closet and take a closer look at what's actually happening. Yet in most cases, to understand takes an open mind. And sometimes with understanding comes trauma. Yet trauma can be worthwhile. Melanie knows that. Even though some of our lives would be upset in the short run, understanding the bizarre details of UFO encounters can do nothing but benefit us all in the end. I extend a special greeting to any Native Americans who might be here, because it is you who are in part the sacred keepers of some eternal truths and some human truths. Some of those truths towards which the ETs, the U-folk, are guiding us. At least the ETs I've encountered. I'll give you some more of my thoughts about this in a moment. I'm going to slant my talk towards an idea that's not new, but I don't believe many people are fully aware of. The idea that UFOs lie at the core of our culture. That the mysterious intelligences behind UFOs are most probably profoundly affecting our cultures. They even might be responsible for some of our deepest thoughts, feelings, and beliefs at times. I know they are at least a part of our heritage. In the past, many public talks about UFOs have been oriented around the simple, relentless question of whether or not UFOs are real. There has been a lot of work accomplished by many UFO investigators and researchers to bring this reality to the public. We also owe them a great deal. We owe a great debt to people like Wendell Stevens and people like him who have stuck with it over 50 years now in research. However, today I'm going to go far beyond the simple question of whether or not UFOs are real. In a moment, we're going to get right into some very unbelievable material that's not normally talked about in public. My experiences have been overwhelming and immense, and I want you to feel some portion of what I felt. This will make me feel better. Even though you're going to hear just a very small fraction of what's happened to me, I want you to be overwhelmed just like I've been overwhelmed. I'm going to shoot a lot of information bullets at you in a very short time. This might get a little trying at times, so I suggest you lean back, try to relax, and concentrate. You might find my story is unusual in several ways. I should warn you at this point, my story has nothing to do with the little grays, our government, the military, the men in black, or cults. It's not your typical UFO abduction scenario. I'm primarily going to tell you what has happened to me throughout my life. I'll first tell you how I discovered what happened, then what actually happened, then how it might be connected to the changing of our culture. We'll have a little time at the end of my talk so you can ask a few questions. And as you already know, I am not a professional speaker, so please give me a break. Forgive me if I stammer and stutter or lose my way along the way. Yeah, okay. That made sense, didn't it? I'm going to show you as many slides as possible so you literally can get a better picture of what's actually happened to me. There's a story behind every picture, but we won't be able to cover them all today. And I might flick the slides a little fast, so I suggest you not try to read the inscriptions. I believe what I have to say today is much more important than the inscriptions. I apologize for the quality of the slides. We tried them before the talk, and they didn't quite turn out the way I had imagined, and we weren't able to do this before I composed the slides, so they might look a little strange to you. But I have these same slides, some other drawings, and some sculptures in the lobby you can look at later. And I believe that many of you have already looked at them. And I have a small computer out there, and the slides, you'll notice the slides show up much better on the small computer. And the computer is running automatically, so you can read the inscriptions if you would like. This slide represents a composite of all my experiences. As we look at more slides a little later on, we'll be coming back to this slide as a home base. You can tell I'm not a professional speaker because I'm trying to eat the microphone. I can assure you the experiences I'm about to explain are real. I feel they and all other UFO encounters are very important for all of humankind. Pardon me. Although my experiences might seem unbelievable, these extraordinary events actually happen. But don't get me wrong. Although I've had extraordinary events happen to me, I consider myself an ordinary guy. I'm somewhat pragmatic. But I am by no means an expert, and I feel expertise, like the positive and negative aspects of UFO encounters, is like art. It's strictly in the eyes of the beholder. I'm somewhat pragmatic because, as Lou mentioned earlier, I've been a jack of all trades in engineering most of my life. This includes the nuclear, aerospace, fluidic, commercial, civil fields of engineering. I don't have a degree, but I was lucky, or I just took to engineering, you might say. And as he mentioned, I am not a nuclear engineer, and I'm not an aerospace engineer. And he mentioned I also survived as a home builder for some 10-odd years. And Annie, my wife, helped me. She would drive our 110 truck to the lumber yard, for instance, in her miniskirt and high heels. And that really went over big. And I am married to Annie, of course, and that's the most important thing, of course. We have 3 adult children and 7 grandchildren. Annie is somewhere here. Annie, she's right down there. I would like her to stand up so you can know who she is. She also has been a part of all of this and has helped me a great deal for many years. No one knows the difficulties that we've had over the past 14 years. Annie has been extremely patient and understanding, and I can't emphasize this enough. She has her own ideas about what has happened. Okay, here we go, and I'm going to get a drink of water. I'm getting a little dry. The title of my talk is Imminent Discovery, UFOs at the Core of Our Culture. In the spring of 1981, my son-in-law and I said a prayer that we might be able to see a UFO. And about 3 minutes later, a glowing orange disc flew right over our heads. I was about 44 years old. Because of the prayer, I wondered what connection God might have with UFOs. Then in late winter of 1986, at age 48, I recalled a very complex, lengthy encounter that had occurred around 1950, some 36 years earlier. 30 to 50 people saw what I saw that night, and 5 of us were levitated to a hovering craft. In the winter of 1986-1987, at age 49, I spontaneously recalled, in a very short time, what I considered to be an enormous number of so-called UFO encounters. I need to emphasize the number of encounters I remembered was immense. It was as if someone unseen had released the floodgates in my memory. It was very, very traumatic. That's partly because before 1986, I could have staked my life on the fact I hadn't had a close UFO encounter. The many pieces of my memory eventually came together and made sense. Yet it was so awesome, my entire life was turned upside down, including my present, past, and future. It was so immense, complicated, and bizarre, I lost interest in my job. My relationship with my family became almost non-existent, and I developed severe health problems from which I nearly died. This occurred right after I was asked to take my experiences to the public, and here I am, still nervous. What I discovered eventually told a complete and profound story with a beginning, middle, and end, like a novel. Even back then, I thought what I was recalling affected all of humankind, including science, religion, and history. During that 1986-1987 period of recollection, I discovered the bizarre experiences had periodically, clandestinely peppered my entire life, from 2 or 3 years old to just a few months before my flood of recollections. It was August 1986 when I experienced my last overt encounter. During that last experience, those who had orchestrated the encounters and I had a parting of the ways. It seemed strange to me we had a parting of the ways just after my first recollection and just before my flood of recollections. In other words, there seemed to be a time connection. One thing I did to help me understand the experiences was to contact some people I remembered being with me. To my surprise, the first witness I contacted recalled a part of a very extensive experience that had occurred around 1950 at Chadron State Park in Nebraska. I thought then that establishing witnesses would be an easy task. However, most others I contacted later couldn't remember. On the other hand, there are a few people who have recalled parts of encounters, and their recollections have contributed to the validity of my memories. It seems amazing that most of the witnesses didn't recall the encounters until I approached them. As a matter of fact, it's amazing to me I had remembered for certain only one brief sighting before my 1986 recollections. It was the glowing orange disc that my son-in-law and I saw after we said the prayer. We never forgot that sighting. Also, I could always remember several strange things that had occurred throughout my life, but I couldn't make sense of them. Craig, am I too close to the microphone here? Am I okay? Okay. I'm more comfortable here, eating the microphone. This enormous number of experiences occurred over a period of at least 46 years from coast to coast and from Canada to Mexico. However, most took place in and around Lincoln, Nebraska, where I still live. During my recollections, I found I had never been alone during the experiences except for a few short episodes. To me, this is amazing. I have a list of about 150 people I've known well who were with me during one or more encounters. It's puzzling to me that many strangers also were present during many encounters that were up close and personal. Normally, between 2 to 5 of us were present. But remember, most of these people still don't recall. My wife Annie, for instance, still doesn't recall the many experiences we had together, although she has admitted under hypnosis that she's had UFO experiences. She just didn't want to talk about them. I simply validated a few of my previous recollections through a few hypnotic sessions. It seems remarkable that many people and I witnessed the strange craft and bizarre objects even at public events like football games. Many people saw what I saw, but to my knowledge, most of these mysterious events went unreported. I know now the events were not reported because they, quote, the mysterious intelligences orchestrating the encounters, hypnotized us or programmed us in some strange way so we couldn't remember. This is unbelievable, I know, but I even recall forgetting many experiences as they ended, or shortly after. In fact, they told me during my last experience that remembering the experiences would negate their purpose. They also told me a part of their purpose is human progress, or the changing of our destiny. This includes our culture. If you would concentrate on the screen now, I'm going to flick the slides a little fast here. That's kind of hard to say. Flick the slides a little fast. As I began to recall that let me begin again. As I began to recall all that had taken place in 1986, I found my experiences had many, many facets. Among other things, they involved the strange craft and bizarre objects. A mysterious voice coming from an unseen source. Weird beings. This was a very weird being. And so were these. Ordinary but mysterious men. A hierarchy, most of whom we never saw. My development, education, and protection. Connections to the Native Americans. Connections to history. Connections to modern and ancient fraternal organizations. Scientific invention, genetic engineering. Time travel, believe it or not. Of all things, familiar strangers. A vast ET human project and the changing of humankind. Even though I was not aware of my experiences during normal times, they affected my entire life greatly. For example, I discovered through one 1950s experience that my engineering vocation had been planned and was to be manipulated. Even at 14 years old, my deepest beliefs and feelings were at least somewhat affected. These last two slides show my sisters levitating when they told me, the mysterious intelligences told me I would be an engineer. I figure if all of this has happened to me, it likely has happened to many others. Therefore, the destiny of our culture is being, and has been, at least somewhat orchestrated by these mysterious intelligences. Legendary in history, for instance, seem to support the fact that they've always been with us throughout the ages. And I know many of you are aware of this through authors such as Joe Lewis and Zachariah Sitchin. It's time for the world to recognize this fact publicly, don't you think? Do you think so? Okay. It's equally important to determine what actually happens during UFO encounters and how it happens. If we understand more deeply, we can live in more natural and fulfilling ways. We might even be able to live without harming and killing each other, and wouldn't that be nice? Simply knowing about the reality of close UFO encounters can be very humbling. If we study the details, it can be life-changing. As with the experiences of other abductees and contactees, many of my memories are nearly photographic. I can recall an enormous number of details. This has overwhelmed me at times, but it's the details that give us clues for deeper understanding. For instance, I believe it's very important for us to note how the strange craft and objects arrive and leave. In many cases, they simply came in flying over the treetops, as you can see here. Or we just turned around and they were there. Or they slowly and mysteriously manifested or simply appeared from a volume of clear, distorted atmosphere, light blue or gray haze, or clouds of dense fog. Sometimes it seemed as if they manifested out of thin air in volumes of colored electric corona. All of this most often occurred very close to us. They disappeared in the same fashion. What was most astonishing is that they could manifest from hissing, roaring fog that spewed into the atmosphere from tiny pinpoints. or from small tornadoes or whirlwinds. And they sometimes left dramatically with a brilliant flash and deafening explosion. In other words, they disappeared instantly. Needless to say, these latter appearances and disappearances were very frightening episodes. All were very real, all very important, affecting what we know as the three dimensions. Yet at times it seemed as if we felt the effects of a multidimensional overlap. Again, I'm going to flick the slides a little fast here. None of my experiences were dreams. They always interrupted normal activities at all times of the day and night. This included, but was not limited to, hunting and fishing. Picnicking and camping. Playing golf. Playing and watching baseball, basketball, and football games. You've seen this one before. Attending Northeast High School in Lincoln. Watching school plays. Attending church services and related activities, believe it or not. Working in the yard. Working at a uranium mine and surveying mining claims in western Wyoming. Working at one of America's first nuclear power plants near Hallam, Nebraska, and in one of America's early space programs just outside Los Angeles, California. Building houses in Nebraska. And even while using an outhouse in western Wyoming. That was unbelievable. It's important to note that most experiences occurred between noon and midnight. I discovered during my 1986 recollections that I could divide the encounters into two different types, what I call the simple experiences and the more complex experiences. And that's really original, isn't it? That's an engineer. The next thing I'd like to do is concentrate on the detailed drawings, on some detailed drawings of the crafts and objects we saw during the more simple experiences. I made some of these simple line drawings as I recalled the experiences in 1986 and 1987. The other line drawings I use in a book I've written, and it's called, and you probably have already guessed it, The Imminent Discovery. I'm presently looking for a publisher. I've also written another companion book. It's called To Earth from Heaven. If you're interested, I have a few unedited copies on computer CD with animated drawings. And if your computer doesn't have CD-ROM drive, I can possibly make a copy on 3.5-inch floppy disk and match your word processor. But the drawings and text will be separate and they won't be animated. I plan to offer these on Amazon.com if I can figure out how to do it. And I am not completely computer literate, that's for sure. Now I encountered this first group of craft and objects, as you see here, during the simple experiences an enormous number of times. So often they now seem like old friends or nagging relatives. I haven't decided which. They sometimes harassed us by swooping in close to us or manifesting from the roaring, hissing fog. We tried to catch them at times, or we ran away from them. It was sometimes like playing a game of tag, and we sometimes had a lot of fun. These somewhat simple experiences sometimes occurred one after the other in a series that could last for days during trips, for instance. Some of the structures seem to consist of a combination of metal and ceramic. Others seem to be made of something similar to plastic. Here's the craft and objects in more detail. This is the metallic ceramic coffin. We sometimes felt extremely weird as we simply stood there looking at it. It's amazing that it appeared very similar to or exactly like one of ancient Egypt's gods' flying chariots or celestial boats. Believe it or not, it is depicted in a historic painting, and I know some of you have seen that. Other contactees have interacted with it, the coffin, as well. The next is a group of small discs that normally showed up in a group of 4 or 5. They sometimes had dual headlights and concentric rings inside the illuminated areas. The rings could look like eyeballs, and the way the discs were sometimes maneuvered seemed to suggest they were alive. I've had other contactees tell me that they've seen these discs before, and just looking at the drawings scares the living daylights out of them. The right figure is the bell-shaped object. It looks similar to the Mercury capsule of the United States space program. Isn't that interesting? This, the metallic windowed saucer, played a variety of important roles. Others and I were inside of it a number of times. And there was a small booth that seemed to be plastic and looked like the cabin of a stagecoach from the front side. I've been told by a doctoral student that a part of ancient American Indian lore includes this booth. And I've also been told this by a mature Indian woman of the Omaha tribe. The booth was part of what I call the saucer booth routine, which I'll discuss a little later. The booth wouldn't fly in during the simple experiences, but the other craft would usually just fly in or manifest, as I've described previously, very close to us. We got into some of the crafts and objects. We hit the booth, for instance, and kicked it like you would kick the tires of an automobile when you're trying to determine how good they are. My cousins almost tore this booth apart. Sometimes we touched the coffin, for instance. At least twice I felt my hand going through it, and I felt a tingling as my hand went through it. This leads me to believe some of the objects were in a few cases semi-corporeal. We often heard a voice during the more simple experiences, but we couldn't see who was speaking. It most often seemed to come from the object or craft, or it could resound from midair or resound inside our heads. This mysterious voice would simply greet us and carry on a personal, casual conversation, calling some of those nearby by their given names. It was a rich male voice who spoke in perfect English. Sometimes it seemed as if it was a pre-recorded presentation. That is, at times we heard static and the message was broken. It was very peculiar. Sometimes it would speak simple phrases about the Native Americans and buffalo, but these phrases didn't really make sense at times. As you can imagine, all of this was extremely puzzling. This type of routine could agitate one of the men who stood near me. A man could be so agitated, he would go to his car. He would cuss at the voice, first of all, and then he would go to his car and get his pistol and shoot the object. Once I heard a fellow inform the voice and the booth of its last moments alive. These are very dramatic and shocking episodes. The voice would mimic the aggressive or bad attitudes of some of these people. Imagine yourself standing there talking with an invisible, sometimes humorous, sometimes caustic voice who was much more intellectually advanced than you. If you called it honey, it might call you honey. If you called it an SOB, it would most likely call you an SOB. During some of these simple experiences, we felt strange forces on our bodies and minds. The forces could be so strong, we felt slightly disoriented, or it took our breaths away. This might have been the true purpose for the simple encounters. They, whoever they were, possibly, even probably, were conditioning us physically and mentally through some strange process. These types of simple routines occurred throughout most of the 46-year period of experiences. One simple routine that varied greatly from time to time was even more puzzling, the saucer booth routine. A flight of discs, for example, would show up, or the coffin, or the disc coffin and bell. While we tried to figure out what they were, we would hear music, most often classical music, and the voice who was proclaiming something about, quote, eternal knowledge and wisdom and the Indians and buffalo, end of quote. When we turned to see what was happening, we saw the windowed saucer flying in. It could have streams of fog under it and all around it. As the saucer hovered just above the ground, not more than feet away, the voice would encourage all of us to gather around for something related to, quote, eternal knowledge and wisdom and the Indians and buffalo, end of quote. The voice sometimes sounded like a barker at a circus, and the music could continue to play in the background. Sometimes we heard circus music. It didn't really make sense, and we got astonished, dumbfounded. Then the saucer would rise about 12 feet above the ground, and the small booth would slowly and mysteriously descend from the saucer's underside. Seeing this was extremely shocking. The saucer would move off, and the voice would again encourage everyone to get into the booth for eternal knowledge and wisdom, Indians and buffalo. We got more puzzled. Some of us nearby would eventually take a seat on the benches. This was at a Boy Scout camp near Fremont, Nebraska, when we were all dressed up as Native Americans for a ceremony, very appropriately. Sitting inside the booth, we would again hear more music and other somewhat incoherent statements about the Native Americans and buffalo. After nothing else seemed to occur, we left the booth. Then after everything settled down, we would